Today we're setting sail. Well, not literally, of course, but we are going to be taking a journey back in time, back to the days of Vikings and Norse explorers. And we're going to be looking at the story of Leif Erikson.
What's really fascinating about Leif Erikson is this idea that he may have reached North America almost 500 years before Christopher Columbus did. And, it really challenges that traditional narrative that we have, about the discovery of the New World.
Yeah, it's like this missing piece of the puzzle.
Mhm.
You know, we learned about Columbus in school, but Leif Erikson, not so much. So where are we getting our information from for this exploration?
Well, we're going to be looking at some historical sagas and some archaeological findings. Like we're using these old stories and some actual physical evidence to kind of paint a picture of what might have happened.
I like that. So who was this guy, Leif Erikson?
Well, he was born around the year 970, probably in Iceland.
Right.
And his father was Eric the Red, who founded the first Norse settlement in Greenland. So, a family of explorers. And Eric the Red, let's just say he liked to push the boundaries a bit.
Yeah, he was banished from Norway and then banished again from Iceland. That's how he ended up in Greenland. I guess exploration and maybe a little rebelliousness ran in the family.
Absolutely. Yeah, those traits definitely seem to have been passed down to Leif. And he's most famous for this discovery of a place called Vinland that we believe was part of North America.
Hmm.
And there are two main sagas that tell his story. And they each offer a slightly different perspective on how it all happened.
Oh, two versions. Okay, this is already getting interesting. I like it. So tell us about these two sagas.
All right, so the saga of Eric the Red tells the story of how Leif was sailing from Norway to Greenland, and he got blown off course by a storm. It was a bit of an accidental discovery.
What a detour. I mean, talk about a lucky break. He ends up in a whole new continent. So what about this other saga? What's the story there?
So in the saga of the Greenlanders, it says that another explorer named Jarni Herjolfsson, he actually spotted Vinland first. And then Leif bought Herjolfsson's ship to go back and retrace the voyage. So in this version, it was more of a deliberate expedition.
Okay, so one's a chance encounter, the other's a planned mission. But they both agree that Leif found this place called Vinland. What made it so special?
Well, in both of the sagas, they describe Leif finding all these really valuable resources, like wild grapes and self-sown wheat and maple trees. And because of that, he named it Vinland, which means wineland.
Self-sown wheat. That's interesting. That means the climate must have been suitable for agriculture. That must have been pretty exciting for them to find a place like that.
Yeah, it seems like it had everything they needed to thrive. And for centuries, people wondered where this fabled Vinland was. Then in the 1960s, they discovered this Norse archaeological site in Newfoundland, Canada called L'Anse aux Meadows.
So we're talking about actual Viking settlements, not just stories being passed down through generations. That's pretty amazing. What exactly did they find there?
They found the remains of dwellings and workshops, and a large building that could have been a feasting hall. And through carbon dating and tree ring analysis, they were able to confirm that the site was occupied around the year 1000, which lines up perfectly with the timeline of Leif's voyages.
That's remarkable. So is this Les Aux Meadows? Is that definitively Leif's Vinland?
It's widely accepted as proof that the Norse were in North America before Columbus. But whether or not it's the exact location of Leif's settlement, which was called Leifsbudir, that's still up for debate. Some scholars think that Vinland might have been a larger region, maybe encompassing areas around the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and that L'Anse aux Meadows was more of a base for further exploration.
So Leif Erikson, this son of a banished Viking, sails across the Atlantic and stumbles upon this new land full of resources. What happens next? Does he go back? Do other people follow him? This is where things start to get really interesting.
Leif did go back to Greenland, and when he got back, he told everyone all about this land. He had found this amazing land. And of course, everyone was really interested. I mean, you can imagine
Right.
hearing these stories about fertile lands and all these resources, especially when you're living in a place like Greenland, which was known for being pretty harsh.
Oh yeah, I'd be interested too. So did Leif ever go back to Vinland himself? I mean, after he told everyone about it?
We don't really know for sure if Leif went back, but his stories definitely got other people excited about going there. And his brother Thorvald, he decided to set out with his own crew a few years later.
Another Erikson brother heading across the Atlantic. So did Thorvald find Vinland too? I mean, did he have the same experience that Leif had?
He did reach Vinland, yeah. And he probably explored some areas around the Gulf of St. Lawrence. But things didn't go quite as smoothly for him as they did for Leif, according to the sagas. There was a confrontation with the indigenous peoples, the people who were already living in Vinland. And unfortunately, Thorvald ended up dying.
So these encounters weren't always peaceful then. It sounds like there was some tension there.
Yeah, it just goes to show how complicated these early interactions must have been. You have these different cultures, different ways of life, and probably different ideas about things like land ownership and resources. And the sagas, they give us these little glimpses into these clashes. There were skirmishes and misunderstandings, and eventually it led to violence on both sides.
I noticed that the sagas use the term Skraeling to refer to the indigenous peoples, which we know now is an offensive term.
That's right. And even though the sagas don't really give us a lot of details about those interactions, they do make it clear that these encounters could be really dangerous. And it reminds us that even when people are setting out to explore with good intentions, things can go wrong and have really tragic consequences.
It really makes you think, what if things had gone differently? What if there had been more understanding, more communication between the Norse and the indigenous peoples? Maybe things could have turned out better.
Yeah, it's a question that historians are still thinking about today. Even though the Norse presence in Vinland was only temporary, it raises some really important questions about cultural exchange and conflict and the long-term effects of those first encounters between different groups of people.
It also shows how important it is to look at things from different points of view. When we're studying history, we have to go beyond just the explorer's perspective and acknowledge the experiences of the people who were already there.
Exactly. We have to try to understand the whole picture, all the complexities and all the different human stories involved.
So you mentioned before that Leif wasn't the only one to go to Vinland. Were there other Norse explorers who followed in his footsteps?
Oh, yeah. Leif's voyages kind of opened up this pathway for others to follow. His other brother, Thorstein, he tried to reach Vinland too, but unfortunately he died during the voyage. But there was still this strong desire to settle this new land. And so there was this wealthy merchant and explorer named Thorfinn Karlsefni, and he put together this big expedition. He brought men and women and livestock and tools and supplies, everything they would need to start a new life in Vinland.
This sounds a lot more serious than the earlier voyages. Like they were really committed to making Vinland a permanent Norse settlement. Did it work out for them?
Well, at first things seemed to be going pretty well. The expedition landed in Vinland, probably in a different spot than where Leif had settled, and there are even accounts of them trading peacefully with the indigenous peoples.
So there were times when they did manage to cooperate with each other.
Right. It seems like there were these moments of peaceful coexistence. But then the tensions would start to rise again. The sagas tell us that the Norse built houses and started farming the land. And there's even a story about a child being born there, who's believed to be the first European born in North America.
Wow, a Norse child born in Vinland. It sounds like they were on their way to creating a whole new society in this new world.
Yeah, but it didn't last, unfortunately. The sagas tell us that the fighting got worse, and there were more skirmishes and raids. Karlsefni was worried about the safety of his people. And in the end, he decided they had to abandon the settlement and go back to Greenland.
So after all that effort, all that hope, the Norse just gave up on Vinland.
It seems that way. The reasons why the colony failed are complicated, and historians are still debating them today. Some people think it was because of the conflicts with the indigenous peoples, and others say it might have been because of the harsh climate, or maybe they didn't have enough resources, or maybe some of them were just homesick. But even though the settlements were temporary, they did have an impact on history.
How so? If they didn't stay, how could they have had a lasting impact?
Well, their voyages changed people's understanding of the world. They expanded what people knew about geography, and they give us this fascinating look at a time when these different cultures came together in this new unexplored land. They remind us that history isn't always a straight line. It's full of these unexpected twists and turns. And there are so many stories out there that are just waiting to be discovered.
It's like we're adding another layer to what we know about the first voyages across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And it shows just how complicated these early encounters were.
Right. And it's through stories like Leif's and the other Norse explorers
Yeah.
that we can start to really appreciate how complex history is, all the triumphs and tragedies, and that enduring human desire to explore and connect and try to understand the world around us.
Leif's story is definitely one that's captured people's imaginations for a long time. But his legacy goes beyond just those daring voyages. You mentioned earlier how his image has been used and interpreted in different ways throughout history, especially in North America. So let's talk about that a little bit. It really is a captivating story. I mean, it's not just about Vikings sailing across the ocean. It's about pushing those boundaries,
Yeah.
and challenging what we think we know and those encounters with different cultures. But you're right, his legacy goes way beyond those voyages. So how has Leif Erikson's image been sort of reshaped and reinterpreted over time?
Well, it's interesting to see how his story has been kind of woven into different cultures and how it's been used to represent different values and aspirations.
So it sounds like he's more than just a historical figure then. What are some examples of how his image has been used?
Well, his popularity really took off in North America, especially in the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
That was a time when a lot of Scandinavians were immigrating to the U.S., right?
Exactly. And many of those immigrants, they were looking for a way to feel like they belonged in this new country. And they saw Leif Erikson as a symbol of their heritage.
So they were using his story to kind of connect themselves to the history of their new home.
Yeah, they were saying, hey, our ancestors were here centuries ago. We're a part of this.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about that historical connection, was it?
No, Leif's adventures and his voyages, they also fit in really well with that American idea of westward expansion,
Yeah.
that spirit of exploration and pushing into the unknown.
He kind of became a symbol for those pioneers striking out on their own.
That's right.
He represents that curiosity we all have about the world, I think. That desire to learn and discover new things. The story of Leif Erikson is just one example of how exploring history can lead us to these amazing discoveries. And it can really make us rethink how we see the world.
Absolutely. And who knows how many other mysteries are still out there waiting to be discovered.
It definitely makes me want to keep exploring. Thanks for guiding us on this journey today. It's been incredible.
It was my pleasure. And to everyone listening, keep searching for those hidden stories. And remember to never lose that sense of adventure when it comes to the past.